Hello and welcome to episode 20 of Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics, a podcast where we're taking a look at the catalogue of Walt Disney animated classics to see which ones really hold up to that lofty height of an animated classic, albeit in this case, a Waly Gisnep animated classic. As always, I am Liam and I'm joined by my very good friend Ben. Ben, what are we taking a look at this week?
This week, Liam, we're looking at 1977's The Rescuers, also coming out the same year as The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh.
So to kick off, Ben, going into this, what were your memories and your general feelings about The Rescuers?
As with seemingly every film from the 60s and 70s, I watched this a huge amount as a young child, so it's very deeply ingrained. So I've probably seen this film 30, 40 times, but I'd say only 2 of those are in the last 20 years, so my feelings and memories on it are very mixed. I remember the last time I watched it saying, this is fine. This is a solid 3-star film. Having rewatched it, I think my feelings have changed. How about you?
I never watched this film as a child. I watched the sequel a lot. The sequel was probably one of my favourite films as a child, but I never knew there was an original. So this is a film I've only really seen a handful of times, and only really in the last few years. And in a way, I'm quite glad I never watched it as a child, because this was a film that was heavily led by directing animator Don Bluth in what was his first leading role at Disney. And as would become a staple of Don Bluth films, this film I find is equal parts bleak and saccharine.
That's a hell of a combination. Well, let's dive right into it then. So, we open with an establishing shot of a ruined steamer boat stuck in the Louisiana swamp, and we see a young girl throw a message in a bottle out into the water. A couple of things jump out at me watching this opening. One is that this film only uses non-diegetic music, so all the music and songs featured in this were written for this film, and roughly tell the story, or at least a story, going throughout the film. But this isn't a musical, these are all songs that are played over the action. And so over the opening credits, we get a song called The Journey. How do you find these songs, Liam?
I've got to say, I do think all the music in this film is absolutely gorgeous. I think this film definitely has Don Bluth's fingerprints all over it. So I feel that a lot of Don Bluth films are very grounded in reality, but then they add a fantasy twist of escapism. In this case, we have a very real and very bleak setup of this girl in the Louisiana swamp just crying out for someone to help her, and the fantastic twist is a rescue society led by little mice. But the character of the little girl Penny and the problems she faces are very grounded and quite scary. So I think if you were to make it a musical, you lose a lot of that.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it would lose some of its edge, I guess. And I think generally this is a film that is a lot more grounded in realism, obviously the anthropomorphic animals aside. It's also, to my recollection, the first Disney film, outside of maybe Dumbo, that's actually set in the time when it came out. We don't get a specific year, but you can see this is, for the time, modern contemporary New York where this is based. Which again is quite interesting because we've not really had a Disney film set in that environment. So that's the first thing that stands out for me. The second thing is, during this opening, they go for, rather than sort of an animated opening after Penny's thrown the bottle, we get these sort of, I guess they're like oil painting backgrounds of this bottle kind of going on this journey as this song plays and the credits roll. I kind of like the simplicity of it, but I find it hard to describe. I don't know if you can put it better than me, but I find these oil backgrounds quite weird.
Yeah, so what you're noticing is the grain of the canvas. So they've actually painted it on canvas, and when you're looking at a still image of canvas, your eye's drawn to the grain of it.
That's exactly it. You're absolutely right.
Which makes it very obvious that you're looking at a still image, whereas compare this to the still image we saw in, say, the Aristocats, where the cats are under the bridge and someone's shaking the picture. You couldn't do that with a canvas because the grain would be moving and it would seem odd. So you've got a still image, you can see the grain, your brain goes, I'm looking at a painting, which kind of defeats the purpose of animation.
It's also why you're not allowed to shake the paintings in art galleries. They're very strict on it. Looks weird.
I will say I do like all of the paintings, and if I'm ever fortunate enough to track down remnants of these films that are archived, I'd love one of these paintings. Of all the things in the Disney catalogue, one of these paintings would be absolutely fantastic to have.
Yeah, they're absolutely stunning. And again, I think all these are decisions that are being consciously made to say, we're not doing a standard Disney film. Whether that's a good decision or not, we'll talk about as we go, but I think it's a very conscious decision to say we're doing a Disney film that's different in tone and visual and musical style. My only other note on the opening credits is you see Ron Clement's name show up, who was a major player in the Disney Renaissance, so he's getting his credits in early here. And then we cut to where the bottle ends up, which is in modern-day New York. Specifically, we find ourselves at the UN headquarters, and we've got delegates from all sorts of countries arriving to attend some sort of convention.
I really enjoy this United Nation of stereotypes.
I literally wrote the National Stereotype Society. As the human delegates are arriving, we see the mouse delegates from each of these different countries climbing out of their bags. And there's some things here. So first off, did the airport not notice all the bags had rodents in? Because I'm sure they do a check on that sort of thing.
I was going to say, I miss the days where you could arrive in New York and no one notices there are mice in your luggage.
It was on my carry-on, it's fine. And then the other thing that, again, it's quite cute, but also just doesn't really make any sense. There's a tiny little mouse hole with a door that says mouse entrance for, like, the delegates. And I was thinking, yeah, but who else is going to use it? The humans aren't going, oh, how can I fit in here?
I am a sucker for parallel societies, particularly when it's involving animals, where we have the people and each of the people seem to have like a one-to-one correspondence where a little mouse will come out of each person's bag, and yet despite this, the people seem to be completely unaware of the parallel mouse society, despite the fact that the mice are obviously very aware of the human ones and have modelled themselves after it. I will say it's not the best example of this in the Disney catalogue, but I still enjoy it.
From there then, we see the mice delegates arriving at what's known as the Rescue Aid Society, which obviously is where the name The Rescuers comes from. We see delegates arriving from different countries. Aside from the fact there's various stereotypes which we've already mentioned, the one thing that really jumped out to me is one person's name tag says Austria, another person says Vienna. So Austria get 2, and then there's one delegate for all of Africa.
I think that Western children often get a bad rap for assuming that Africa is a country rather than a continent. But when you look at the media they consume, you're like, well, who's to blame here?
It's the Rescue Aid Society. That's who's to blame. We'll sue them out of existence.
During our introduction to the Rescue Aid Society, we also get to meet one of the heroes of our tale, Bernard, who is the janitor for the New York division of the Rescue Aid Society. And I have to say, immediately, I love the character of Bernard.
Yeah, voiced by comedian Bob Newhart. I think the voice performance just works exceptionally well, and I think it's just a really refreshing character. I can't really think of many Disney characters at all, but certainly not prior to this film, that have that right balance. He's quite timid and quite sort of socially awkward, but also he does have quite a clear sense of morality. He's genuinely quite a well-balanced, interesting character to watch. But yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the voice performance.
They do something really nice to establish this, and again, it's that kind of non-verbal storytelling where he's greeting everyone by name, which shows that he knows and respects all the people and he loves his job. And then when they're singing the anthem of the Rescue Aid Society, he's outside, sort of hat to heart. No one else is there, but he's still singing it, mumbling to himself to just show that like he loves what he's doing and where he is in life, despite the sort of shorthand that he's a janitor, which is shorthand as a very lowly kind of position within the company. So immediately, I love Bernard, and that's something I never really appreciated having watched the sequel as a kid because he's already an established character. But coming back and watching The Rescuers as an adult, I'm like, they nailed this character right away.
Yeah, I honestly think Bernard and Miss Bianca, who we'll come to in a moment, I genuinely think they're one of my favourite Disney couples because I find their relationship quite believable, and it's quite grounded as well. Like a lot of things in this film, I know we're talking about anthropomorphic mice, but that relationship is quite real and quite human, whereas it's not fantastical and, love at first sight and all that sort of stuff. It's quite believable, the relationship they have. Just another minor point is I like the way, with one notable exception, all the mice are basically drawn like mice. Like, obviously, they're on their hind legs and, they've got more humanoid proportions, but facially they look like mice. Except the kind of chair of the organisation, who's like twice as big as any of them and looks like your standard cartoon mouse. I don't know why he looks so different.
Since you mentioned her, shall we move on to Miss Bianca, who arrives late, saunters in, and can I just say, spoilers for the end of the podcast, might be the sexiest character in any film.
The first thing we establish about Miss Bianca is every mouse in the Rescue Aid Society wants to bang her. And that's not me being crude or exaggerating. That's literally what happens. They don't use the term bang, obviously. That's my shorthand there. So yeah, she comes in, she's clearly got her trendy high fashion on. We establish she's got very ornate, recognisable perfume. She's the Hungarian delegate, which is a nice touch. Ava Gabor, who's the voice actor returning from the Aristocats, where she voiced Duchess, returning in the role, was Hungarian, which I think is just a nice little Easter egg there.
I like that they didn't try to pass it off as a Parisian accent this time.
Much like Phil Harris's French accent. One more note on the Rescue Aid Society. There's no evidence to suggest this is the case, but I really like to think that Basil the Great Mouse Detective was a member in the Victorian period.
At the very least, I'm going to assume that Dawson went on to found it after working with him.
Well, if you paid attention, Liam, you'd know that it was founded in ancient Greece by Euripides Mouse.
Oh, it was?
So take that, Disney Slam.
Oh, I apologise.
Okay, sorry, I'll stop.
And so the Rescue Aid Society has came upon this message in a bottle, and I do enjoy that they found the message in the bottle and their immediate response was, we're the ones who are able to help, as opposed to taking it to the proper authorities.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're clearly trying their best, but this seems like critical evidence. Although I will note that, so the note says, I can't remember exactly what it says, but it basically says, help. She's addressed it to her old orphanage and it says, from Penny, send help, or something like that. And it's quite weirdly written and Miss Bianca kind of has to parse it for them. And they go, we've got to help this child. And I was like, we don't know Penny's a child. It could just be an illiterate weirdo.
The letter as well, I think, is a really good setup. So one thing I enjoy about this film is that there is an element of mystery to it. We're not told immediately in the letter what's going on, because in its journey, some of it has faded with seawater, which is a really nice touch for hiding information, and it becomes a sort of trail of, okay, well, what are our next steps? It's addressed to the orphanage. We'll have to check out the orphanage. And we follow these steps almost like a detective film, which is a really nice touch.
Also a nice touch, going alongside the sponge from Cinderella, I find Bernard getting the note out of the bottle weirdly satisfying. Because he physically has to climb inside the note and then sort of use the edges of the bottle to shimmy it up. It sounds silly, but he moves the way you would have to in that situation to get that outcome. It looks really good.
I really like the bottle. I've got a note on this. I want to know specifically how they did it. Did they put a green filter over the animation cells and that's how they got the effect? Because the colour grading on Bernard is spot on for this character in a green bottle. The voicing and the effect they've applied to the sound is spot on with the echoing. It's just a really well done sequence and leads me actually into a point that I really like about this film, which is that the scaling is often done very well. You feel like these are mice in a human's world. So in order to get into the bottle in the first place, Bernard uses a ladder, which has been repurposed from an old comb, which is a nice little way of saying, well, how would a mice use a ladder? They'd use a comb. And the film often gets this right. As I say, you ask the question, how would a mouse do this? There's a really nice section later on with an airport, and it feels very realistic for how mice would travel via air travel. It's not just a miniaturized human airport. But I will say it is only maybe 90% of the time they nail that scaling. So there are times when the clothes I'll sort of forgive and assume that they've made their own clothes, but when they have their own little umbrellas and lanterns, it kind of breaks those rules that they've so well established.
They also, even though Don Bluth and the other creators behind this film were clearly making a statement about deviating from a lot of the Disney norms, they stick to the Disney norm that no one wears trousers.
Not even the humans.
Even though I know that's not true, I still had to mentally scan the film to say, do they wear trousers? I don't think Madame Medusa does. She's in a dress. They do wear trousers, just to clarify. Although there is some nudity in this film, which we'll get to later on. But
much like the really strong establishing of Bernard's character, to really establish Miss Bianca, she is the first one to jump at the chance to read the letter. And when she reads the letter, her immediate response is that we have to do something. We're the ones that have to do this. And then it's suggested by Bernard that she wants to go, but it could be dangerous. Maybe someone else should go with her because he might be a nice man, but he's still a little bit misogynistic.
Yeah, it was the 70s. Yeah, and I think it's a really nice moment because we establish the common ground between these two characters, where they both have different approaches and different backgrounds, but they're both driven by trying to do the right thing. Whereas we establish a lot of the other delegates at the Rescue Aid Society are maybe a bit more ineffectual and a bit more, oh, we'd love to do something, but you know how it is, and all that sort of stuff. I don't know if that's a subtle dig at the UN in general, but I genuinely think, yeah, it's a really nice moment and establishes we've got two different characters here, but they have something in common, and that's going to unite them.
And Miss Bianca agrees that someone should go with her, at which point every mouse in the Rescue Aid Society, male and female alike, all jump at the chance throwing their hand up, with the exception of Bernard because he's just the janitor. He doesn't even consider that he would go. But Miss Bianca seeing this, showing that she's got a soft spot for him, and she can see his character, by which I mean his internal character, not his physical character. He's in a bottle, but she can see him. She can see his character, and she's like, I choose Bernard. And it's just a lovely moment. And thus we've established our pairing who are going to go on a journey to rescue Penny.
And as you say, this is very much a detective story. So first off, their only lead is Penny's old orphanage. They try taking a shortcut through the zoo. Bernard has some shenanigans with a lion. I don't really know what this scene is doing in the film. It doesn't seem to add much. But I suppose it adds some character stuff in that it establishes Bernard is maybe not a coward, but he is someone who is a bit superstitious and maybe a little bit anxious and wary, but he does want to do the right thing, and particularly when he's around Miss Bianca, he wants to show that he's strong.
Since you've mentioned his superstition, this was something that stood out to me in the film, because once again we're back to Disney doing an adaptation of an existing property, in this case the Miss Bianca children's books, and the whole superstition thing feels like something that's lifted from the book, but they never really do anything with it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair criticism, and again, I'm really heaping praise on this film early on, because I think they do set up the characters really well. But yeah, I think characters and tone are the strengths of this film, and even though there's some things I like about the plot, I don't necessarily think plot is a particularly strong part of this film, and that's a prime example where we set something up and it just never really goes anywhere. It's just every time Bernard encounters number 13, he's a bit ugh.
I will also add, regarding the zoo, I know that a lot of the animators locked horns with the execs at Disney, where everything was about just keeping things cheap and churning out a film because they were struggling at this time. And it does feel like maybe they wanted to do something with the zoo, but the execs were like, keep it cheap, cut the scene, just move on. And it definitely feels like something is missing there.
Well, what's missing, Liam, is any footage of the lion, because all we get is a couple of backgrounds and Miss Bianca and Bernard just going, oh, in the rain. That's all that happens. It goes on for about 5 minutes. And then they arrive at the orphanage, where they start looking for clues. Now, one thing I noticed is that one of the boxes' belongings belongs to a Jim Jones. Now... I'm not saying it's the same Jim Jones, but if it is, this must be the least lucky orphanage in the world, and that is a bold claim.
After a nice, warm, fantastical escapism sequence with the Rescue Aid Society, the orphanage is just a bucket of cold water of bleak realism. Penny's box of treasures might be the most depressing thing Disney have animated so far.
Yeah, I'd agree. And so basically, it's just like, I think there's like buttons in there and like an old shoe and just a few other bits and pieces. But again, I think it's really good visual storytelling that we're establishing that this character really does have nothing. And again, we get a very bleak flashback narrated by the old cat who lives at the orphanage. Initially, they're very scared because he's a cat, but afterwards, they go into detective mode. Literally, Bernard pulls out a notebook and starts taking notes and asks him some questions. And the cat relays this story about the last time he'd seen Penny. Again, it's just really, really bleak. It's just a young girl who's an orphan who's been rejected again by prospective parents, and she's just worried no one's going to ever want her. And that's the scene. It's really, really sad.
Penny mentions his...
We're laughing. I don't know why. What's wrong with us? We're just terrible people.
It's impressive just how bleak this film is. As I say, this feels very much like the blueprint that would become Don Bluth's career. Even the cat. Rufus is the most Don Bluth cat I've seen in ages.
Yeah, he's got little glasses.
There are two things that Don Bluth does really well, and that's cats and sexy ladies.
This film's got both. One of them's a mouse, admittedly, but it still counts.
I do enjoy that Penny says that it was adoption day and a nice couple came, but they ended up adopting a little red-headed girl. To which I thought, isn't Penny red-headed? I know I'm colourblind, but isn't she red-headed? I know at one point later in the film they get confused and give her blonde hair, but... Or is she a brunette?
She's kind of like gingery, I guess, or maybe like strawberry blonde. I thought you were going to say, is the implication that they took Annie?
Everyone's from this orphanage.
God, Annie, Jim Jones and the Rescuers. That's such a weird crossover.
I think now is a good time for me to mention that I actually quite like the voice actress for Penny.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think it's the right balance between being filmic and being a performance, but also she sounds like, I don't know how old Penny's meant to be, like 8, 9, 10, something like that. She sounds like a little girl. Like, yeah, I think they really nail all the human elements in this, excluding the villains, which we'll come to later. They feel very grounded and very real.
When she is sad, she sounds like a sad little girl. And it really plucks at your heartstrings. And when she's happy, you feel that joy. And for someone so young to be able to emulate those emotions so well reading from a script, I am genuinely impressed.
So it just goes to show there are good voice actors out there. Admittedly, it's taken us 40 years of Disney films to get one that me and Liam agree on as good. But we got there.
And so the orphanage isn't quite a dead end. Rufus doesn't know what happened to Penny, but he suggested that he did see her with, and I quote, those trashy people from the sleazy porn shop. Really, if you want to see how grounded this film is, this is probably the first and the last time you'll see trashy people and sleazy porn shops mentioned in a Disney film. Not the last time you'll see them in a Don Bluth film, but definitely in a Disney film.
Before we move on to the pawn shop, obviously it's not that kind of pawn shop, it's the other kind of pawn shop. We do just get a very throwaway line when they're speaking to Rufus the cat, that the police searched for a few weeks and then gave up, and I was like, sorry, the police just gave up on like a 10-year-old girl just going missing? I mean, I know it's New York, but were they just like, sod it, don't worry about it? And particularly since the Rescue Aid Society have found evidence of where she is and that she's still alive, like... just depressing.
Ben, it was New York in the 70s. The police never even looked.
Oh, God. That's so horrible. And true. So, following their leads, Miss Bianca and Bernard head to Madame Medusa's pawn shop boutique, where it's full of all sorts of old rubbish, and they go, again, they're doing genuine detective work. They go in the back office and start rootling through her paperwork. I noticed Madame Medusa on the front of her counter has an NRA badge, which I think tells you everything you need to know about her as a character.
And it's relevant later.
It is relevant later.
There's a moment when they're rooting about in the back office where this is one of those scenes where the scale is perfect. This feels like two mice existing in a human world. There's a moment where they have to open a child's workbook that they found, and it turns out to be pennies, but obviously they're mice, and they have to open this huge book. And it's just this lovely little scene.
Yeah, every part of this scene, the mice are interacting in a believable way. They have to try and climb in Medusa's suitcase as she's packing. Bernard manages to get in, but it's kind of crushed. Bianca has to grab onto a loose bra strap and is sort of dangling from it. And yeah, again, the scale is right. But also, I just really like how... One thing Rufus says in the earlier scene is, 2 little mice, what are they going to do? And they can't do a lot. They are just little mice, but I really think it endears the audience to these characters because they can't do a lot. Obviously, they're not capable of interacting with the world very easily, but they genuinely care about what they're doing, and that drives the plot. And again, I think it's just a really nice, passive piece of character building.
And it's during this scene as well that we are introduced to one half of our villainous duo for the film, and that is Madame Medusa. Animated by one of Disney's 9 old men himself, Mr. Milt Kahl. And one bit of trivia I enjoy about this is apparently he based an early version of the character on his then wife, who he didn't like very much, and I'm not sure how much of that carried over to the final version of the character.
For someone who hasn't seen this film either in a while or at all, Liam, how would you describe the character of Madame Medusa?
I mean, trashy and sleazy are pretty good words for it, really.
It also sticks with the long-standing tradition in Disney films that anyone who's got red hair is a dick.
I really love the character design for Madame Medusa. I do think that she has a lot of elements that we've seen before in Milt Kahl's characters, so I'm getting a lot of Madame Mim from her. But one thing he does really well, and I think a lot of this is to do with the Xerox process we've discussed in recent episodes, but she's animated very fluidly. Clearly a lot of frames go into her animation. I do think the downside is because there's lots of sketches and they're all being photocopied, she has that scratchy look that he also had with Madame in The Aristocats. And whereas I could sort of overlook it with a supporting character, when it's such a prominent character and we don't get that scratchiness on many other characters, it's featured heavily on her sidekick, Mr. Snoops, who again was animated by Milt Kahl himself. It's very clear when you're watching the film which characters and which bits he animated, and in a way it really feels like a film with 4 different animating directors.
I think the other major problem with Madame Medusa as a character, aside from her feeling quite different to a lot of the other stuff in this film, and this is probably the most common criticism laid at her, she's just very similar to Cruella de Vil. She's a possibly pseudo-rich fashionista. She has sort of crazy hair and fashion. She's got a fat, bumbling sidekick. She drives a luxury car erratically. She's got some decadent but falling apart property out in the countryside. The parallels just don't do her any favours. And I think it's a real shame because clearly Milt Kahl poured a lot of love into this. This was his last sort of animation project he did. And it's a real shame because the animation itself is excellent. The character is a little forgettable.
I will add, not only does she drive a luxury car, she drives the exact same luxury car. It's the same 3D model they used in 101 Dalmatians.
Animating's hard, alright? It's hard and expensive.
Hey, I love that car effect. I am happy if they use it as much as they want.
Well, it's going to make Frozen 3 look very strange, but I don't care. Despite managing to grab a hold of her briefcase, because of her erratic driving, Miss Bianca and Bernard lose Medusa. But they have a fairly good idea where she's heading. She's heading out to a swamp boat over in Louisiana. So they charter a flight.
And as I mentioned earlier, this isn't just a mouse version of human airlines. The way mice travel when they need to fly is by albatross. And our 2 heroes go to a small little airport on the top of a building, and they go inside and there's the check-in desk. There's a big human radio that's being used. There's an actual clock on the wall as opposed to a giant clock that we would have in an airport. And there's a little chalkboard with all the details on. Again, this is one of those scenes where the scaling is absolutely wonderful. And if the whole film could keep that quality of scaling. I know it's a really hard thing to do, but this is Disney we're talking about. They really should be held to that standard.
So we get this very fun sequence where Orville, the albatross, lands. He lands very clumsily, and we kind of establish that his flying isn't particularly graceful. Bernard talks about taking the train, but Miss Bianca convinces him to take the flight. As he's taking off, again, I think this is a really good example of animators just looking at birds, because if you watch an albatross or any big seabirds take off, they do look very big and clumsy, even though obviously they're very graceful when they're in the air. And when he's sort of running off the building, he just looks fat and useless and rubbish. But obviously as soon as he's in the air, it looks a lot more graceful. I think it's a really nice sequence. And then we get these swooping, diving shots of flying through New York City.
Just a quick point I have about this is, as I mentioned, I grew up with The Rescuers Down Under. So to me, the voice performance of Jim Jordan as Orville just sounds wrong because I'm so used to John Candy as his brother Wilbur instead.
Yeah, I think that's perfectly fair. Although it's not really fair on anyone to compare their humorous voice performance to John Candy, because obviously he was great. We're also legally obliged on any podcast on The Rescuers to mention that during this sequence, in a certain release, I think it's the PAL release, it might just be the UK release, on VHS of this film in the 90s, there was 2 non-consecutive frames of a topless woman in the background in the windows. Now, I had this film on VHS in the 90s, so I do wonder if I've got one of the infamous copies of it, although apparently you can't actually see it unless you go frame by frame.
The point is even in an innocent children's film, Don Bluth couldn't help himself.
It's not in the cinematic cut, and a lot of people have asked, who put it in there, because obviously someone did. I'm not saying Don Bluth broke in to Disney, 5-10 years after he'd left, and went into the ready-to-process VHS print of it and put in some boobs. I'm not saying that's what happened, but no one can prove that it didn't happen.
And during the sequence with the flight, we've got another song that I really like as well. This Tomorrow Is Another Day. All the songs have a very similar tone, but I do think they're all equally nice. I think the melodies are really pretty, and the singing, it has a really nice tone to it that I think fits with the film and wouldn't necessarily fit with other Disney films.
Yeah, they're definitely not songs I'd just sit and listen to. Like, I could sit and listen to a lot of the Renaissance songs and just, they're absolute bangers, whereas these, I think, they work very well in the film. It's not particularly a type of music I enjoy as such, but yeah, I think they work really well for establishing the tone.
And as is going to be a theme in this film, after this wonderful moment of mouse escapism, we're yanked right back into reality as we join Penny and Madame Medusa in the Louisiana bayou, where Penny is now trying to escape and has alligators sent after her.
Now, growing up, I didn't realise how far away Louisiana is from New York. I was kind of like, oh, it'll be a few miles. No, it's like the other side of the country. That albatross flew a bloody long way.
Can I also add that whilst the distance from New York to Louisiana is pretty far, I'm more impressed by the albatross that flew to Australia.
I was a kid, I thought it was a few miles away from New York. And also, from Madame Medusa's perspective, I guess the argument is, no one's going to miss a child in New York from an orphanage, which, to be fair, they didn't. The police stopped looking for her. But surely there's an easier way of getting some child labour in Louisiana in the 70s. I don't know, I'll research it. So we cut back to Louisiana Swamp, and we finally get to spend a bit of time with Penny. We see Mr. Snoops, who is, I was going to call her Cruella, that's a bad sign, is Medusa's bumbling henchman, and she also has 2 terrifyingly large alligators that are used to hunt Penny down. And again, it's just really grim. Penny's wearing these dirty old clothes, and she's literally just wading through a swamp trying to escape alligators and a psychopath on a sort of jet ski, swamp jet ski, a swamp ski. I don't know what you call it.
That sounds much more exciting and less terrifying than it actually is. It's this petrol-powered monstrosity that looks like it's going to explode at any moment. You mentioned Mr. Snoops. Mr. Snoops might be the most fluid animation that we're going to see up until James Baxter shows up in Disney, really.
And it's a shame it's wasted on such a generic, uninteresting character.
In the ensuing chaos where Medusa and Mr. Snoops are desperate to get Penny back. Again, at this point, we still don't know what their plan is. We're at the 35-minute mark, and we don't know what their plan is. It's a really solid structure for a mystery film. But in the chaos, they launch a flare which almost hits Orville, sending him crashing into the swamp. And it's at this point that we're introduced to some friendly animal denizens of the swamp, and get your bingo cards out and tear them up because Sterling Holloway is not here because he died. You don't need your bingo cards anymore.
Hooray! You're right about Sterling Holloway, but we do get Pat Buttram, voice of the Sheriff of Nottingham, amongst other roles. And also, originally, they had a singing bullfrog played by Phil Harris that got cut, because they were obviously like, I'm sick of drawing Baloo.
It also would not fit with the tone of this film.
No, and I think they really made the right call to get rid of it altogether.
As opposed to Pat Buttram, who I'm genuinely surprised how many different places his one voice fits.
It's ridiculous. He's gone from voicing a medieval English lawman to a Louisiana hick rat, and both of them you're like, this is perfect. So the swamp dwellers are keen to help Bernard and Bianca and explain the situation, and Bernard and Bianca, with the help of Eminrude, a dragonfly, sail out to investigate the old steamer. Eminrude does have a credited voice actor, which he just makes buzzing noises.
Maybe it's like with Waly, where they accredit they get someone who's great with Foley, and that person is credited because it's such an important role within Waly. Not such an important role within the Rescuers, but maybe it is just a Foley artist that they've credited.
Eminrude, much like Prince Philip's horse in Sleeping Beauty, is doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of problem solving in this film.
There's a great sequence with him later on and some bats that is incredibly tense.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, after this initial confrontation, which we'll come to in a moment, they send Eminrude back to get help from the other swamp dwellers. And because it's night, tons and tons of bats want Eminrude dead, and he's flying for his life, and he has to hide in a bottle. And one thing I really like about Eminrude as a character, apart from his cute little jumper, that's just a nice touch, is he's a dragonfly, and he flies very fast, but he gets tired really easily because he's only little and he doesn't have a lot of energy. And I was like, oh, that's just a nice little touch.
Whilst they're exploring the swamp as well, there's another shot that I really like, and it just sticks with me every time I watch this film, which is we get to see the alligators from the mice's perspective, and they're absolutely terrifying.
I'm going to say it. They're absolutely terrifying from a human's perspective. They're like 4 times as big as Mr. Snoops.
I do enjoy that they seem to be tame, and rather than just eating Penny, they do grab her by her collar and bring her back to the steamboat.
They do indeed, and when they do, Mr. Snoops, through his clever communication method, lets out a firework. Or specifically, he spells the words "got girl" in the air with fireworks. He's gone down the wrong vocation in life. Being able to write words with fireworks, he could find work in events organising, no problem.
Also, fireworks can be seen for miles. Now, I know the Louisiana Bayou is pretty big, but there's got to be someone that saw those fireworks and was like, maybe we should look into that. Or at the very least, some mice, considering they seem to be the only creatures that do anything.
I genuinely don't think we see a police officer in this film. So, Bernard and Bianca, fearless as always, sneak in and witness Medusa and Snoops talking about why they have Penny, and they're trying to send her down a hole to get some sort of jewels. And we established there's a very specific jewel, the Devil's Eye, that Madame Medusa wants. Again, I find this quite weird in terms of character motivation, because we don't really get a lot of why Medusa and Snoops want this. It seems to be vaguely because it would be worth a lot, but also Snoops shows her like handfuls of gems and says, look at all these we've got, these will sell for a lot, and she like hits them away and said, those aren't what I want. Again, it's just like, are they motivated by money? Does the diamond grant immortality? Who knows?
There is a weird line later that suggests there's something more to the diamond. And again, maybe in the original story and in the planned film, it was there, but it was cut. I will say that from my limited knowledge of diamonds, they are something that, as they increase in size, their value rises exponentially. Like, it's more impressive. Every time you see a larger diamond, it's even more impressive, even if it's just a little bit bigger. And I think this is said to be the world's largest diamond. So whereas all the jewels are probably worth thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, this one diamond alone is worth millions. And that's millions in 1977 money.
Can buy all the child labour you want for that. Madame Medusa and Mr. Snoops go off to rest, and Miss Bianca and Bernard are spotted by the alligators, Brutus and Nero, and we get a whole sequence of Bernard and Bianca hiding in a pipe organ. Again, this is just really terrifying. If you were them, you'd be like, well, I'm dead. There's nothing I can do to stop this now. There's two alligators that can easily kill a fully grown human being, and they want me dead.
I'm really disappointed by this scene because it starts out incredibly tense and terrifying, but as soon as the alligators start hammering the organ, it becomes a bit too comedic and tonally out of sorts with the film so far, and tonally out of sorts with the beginning of that scene.
Yeah, and I think this second half of the film is really where that tone shift starts to harm the film, because even though the premise of it, of kidnapping an orphan girl and sending her to potentially to her death down a hole by the sea, which we'll come to in a moment, the villains are just a bit too kind of over the top and silly. And then just as one of the alligators manages to snap Bernard in its mouth, Madame Medusa comes in, hits it with a broom, drops it, and because it's a mouse, she panics, and then all chaos breaks loose. She breaks out a gun and she's firing wildly, and like it's going all over the place, and in the chaos, Bianca and Bernard get to escape. And I really feel that, given how straight and bleak everything else is up to this point involving the humans, I feel they made the wrong decision with this villain. I feel if they'd gone for a serious, incredibly threatening villain, it would have so much more gravity. I get, obviously, they're trying to do a children's film and they're trying to make it fun and a bit wacky, but it feels like they could have had the fun and wackiness outside of this and then had this be serious rather than the other way around.
You're absolutely right. There's definitely something going on behind the scenes where they're wrestling with tones, and from this point it only really gets a little bit worse.
My only other note on this scene is Madame Medusa comes down because she hears the organ being played, and I can't remember the exact line, but she says, "Oh no, not again," implying, are the alligators regularly playing the organ? Like, is that normal? Because she's not surprised by it. Like,
My final note is that the energy these alligators expend trying to eat these two mice is just not worth the calories they'll get back from it. So after all of this has gone down, Medusa sort of realizes it's lit a fire under her and she really wants to just get this done with. So she goes to see Penny to explain that she's going to go back into the hole tomorrow, and this time she has to find the diamond. And this scene is so well done because, again, it just rips you, again, it just yanks you right back into reality, where we see this horrible character sweet-talking and manipulating this little girl. And it ends on this horrible note where Penny says that she just wants to go home so someone can adopt her, and Madame Medusa just turns around and says, "What makes you think anyone would want a homely little girl like you?" Which, this is what the film does. It will have these ridiculous, fantastical sequences which are, very cartoon and very Disney, and then Don Bluth will run in with a bucket of water and throw it over you and be like, "Nope, reality's horrible and these characters are mean."
I think what's really heartbreaking about this scene is the way it's done and the performances. I feel genuinely like Penny knows that she's being used, but she kind of has stopped caring because she just wants to be free from like this horribly abusive situation. And it's really sad and really heartbreaking. And then we cut to a scene where she's just in her bedroom crying her eyes out because her life is horrible.
But don't get too sad, because whilst Penny is crying, Bernard and Bianca finally make their way to her and explain that they're going to help her, to which Penny responds, "Didn't you bring anyone bigger, like the police?"
Very reasonable question.
And they reassure her that if they all work together, they're all they need to get out of this. But again, I do think taking the letter to the police was an option that they didn't even consider, and maybe they should have given it some thought at least.
I think this might be my favourite scene in the film, and I know that sounds weird because visually it's not particularly exciting, but I think it's the focal point of the film. So even though I think tonally it's a bit all over the place, in some ways the plot is a bit simple, particularly the last act just flies by. This film is only about one thing, there's not really a subplot. Admittedly, you've got a little bit of Eminrude and the Bats, but basically we establish right at the start Penny needs rescuing, she needs help. We follow the journey of the bottle, we follow Miss Bianca and Bernard solving the puzzle of where she is, flying to her, and then as soon as they can, going in, speaking to her and trying to help her. This scene is what we've been building to the whole time, so as a focal point, I think it works really well. After this point, I think the film loses a lot of that edge and that emotive heart, but again, I feel this is just a really sweet moving scene where Penny is genuinely, believably upset, and the characters do what they can to try and help her.
I'd challenge you on saying that it loses its edge, because the next scene we have is fantastic, which is they all decide that it would be foolish to try and escape the same night, so let's just help Madame Medusa get the diamond and then we'll escape. And so we get to see how Madame Medusa and Mr. Snoops have been using Penny, and we follow her down this hole which used to be used as a pirate's hideaway, and it's into this horrible, tight little cave that fills with water as the tide comes in, and they're using her to go down and grab gems and jewels and bring it up, and it's absolutely traumatizing.
Yeah, it's a really horribly claustrophobic scene. There's this horrible gap in the rocks where the water shoots up, and you just look at it and you go, yep, I don't want to be near that hole. It looks like certain death.
I've only seen this film a handful of times, and every time it comes to this scene, it's so well done that I genuinely feel that any of these three characters might not make it out.
They do eventually find the Devil's Eye. It's in the skull of a pirate on the other side of the death hole.
A pirate who has the world's strongest bite, even in death.
Well, right, so they try and get the diamond out through the eye socket, but it won't come out, so they have to use a cutlass to, as you say, jimmy open his lockjaw. Now, if the diamond wasn't put in after he died, as he was lying there dying in this cave, go, with my last bit of strength, I'm gonna eat this diamond.
I always interpreted that witchcraft turned his brain to diamond, which is what killed him.
It's as good as any reason. They get the diamond just as the cave is filling with water, and Medusa immediately turns on both Snoops and Penny. She won't share the diamond with Snoops. I don't know what he was expecting. She's clearly a terrible person. And Medusa also takes off with Penny's teddy bear, because she decides she's become attached to it, although really it's because she's hidden the diamond in it, presumably to smuggle past the clearly very vigilant police of this world.
Talking of Teddy, there's a really nice bit before the hole that I forgot to mention, where Penny's holding on to Teddy, and she looks into the hole, and she says to Medusa, I don't want to go down in there. Teddy doesn't like it. He's scared. Obviously, it's a young child veiling their own fear through their stuffed animal. And despite knowing this, Medusa just turns around and says, that's okay, I'll look after Teddy.
She's such a dick. It's like, oh, literally the only thing you've got in the world, yeah, I'm having that.
I think I prefer her to Cruella de Vil.
I think what she does is a lot worse than Cruella. I know Cruella's going to kill some dogs, I'm not saying that's not a bad thing. But what we see her do is literal child abuse on screen. And I think if these films had come out the other way round, I think Medusa would probably be a lot more well remembered. Aside from the fact the Book of 101 Dalmatians is more famous and more well loved. But yeah, I think Medusa is a better character, and she's massively overshadowed by Cruella de Vil's fame.
She just needed a catchy song written by Mr. Snoops after the whole ordeal.
Well, let's talk about finishing the ordeal off then. So, Medusa leaves Snoops and Penny at gunpoint to leave on her weird swampmobile thing when the swamp animals arrive and launch an ambush.
So it's at this point that Wolfgang Reitman realised that Don Bluth wasn't making a Disney film and stepped in and started making a Disney film.
So what follows?
What follows is complete anarchy with swamp critters attacking this woman, who must just be completely confused by the whole ordeal. Little rabbits in trousers and hats attacking her for apparently no reason.
And it escalates. The alligators get trapped in a lift. They set off all the fireworks and blow up the steamer. And Penny and all the animals escape on Medusa's swampmobile as the steamer explodes. Medusa not giving up, she manages to grab hold of a rope and is dragged along, ends up skiing by the back of the swampmobile whilst riding the two alligators. What are your thoughts, Liam?
Was Mr. Snoops in the steamboat when it blew up?
He was. We see him a little later with all his clothes like scorched, and he's like rowing away on like a little bit of driftwood.
Oh, I forgot about that. I just assumed he'd been blown up.
Well, he was. He just survived it.
I don't like this finale. I think it veers too far into the silliness. And I think almost, as I say, compensating for how bleak the film is up to that point. But because it's such a tonal shift, it's doubly jarring.
Whenever I criticise a film, I always like to at least give a suggestion of what I would have preferred. And I feel Medusa's undoing doesn't come from anything she's done, right? Aside from the fact she's like a bit of a dick and the swamp animals don't like her, so they attack her, there's not really a payoff for that. What really should probably be the finale is have, say, Medusa and Penny in this cave, and they both get a chance to get the diamond. Medusa goes for it, and Penny just goes for a teddy bear and to escape, and Medusa ends up being dragged under the water or something, and she's kind of killed off screen. So her greed kills her, and Penny, because she just wants freedom, she survives. You get these parallels between the villain and the hero, and it's a bit more meaningful, whereas this, it's just a bit wacky.
Ben, where were you in 1977?
I didn't exist.
They really could have used you.
Liam, I wasn't around then, but I was around for the Rise of Skywalker. But did they call? Did they fuck? Despite her best efforts, Madame Medusa ends up gripping onto the remnants of the steamer as Mr. Snoops rows away laughing at her, and Nero and Brutus are waiting below her. Now, I think genuinely the only reasonable interpretation of this is eventually she collapses from exhaustion and is eaten by her own alligators.
Yes. Again, that's Don Bluth running in with that bucket of water.
But it's played for laughs. It's like, whoa, she's got to come up and she's going to be eaten by alligators.
Yeah, it's pretty bleak and also not massively set up other than the fact that she has alligators. Again, you're right, a better end for her would have been being foiled by her own greed. One way I might change it is establish that the little jet ski petrol-powered motorboat requires two people to pilot. She doesn't want to share the loot, so she goes out it alone. It explodes and blows up. Anything like that where you establish something and then you turn against it because of her own greed. But yeah, they just didn't really know how to end her character, so they just have her in this comical chase sequence where she water skis on the back of alligators and then ends up clinging for dear life before presumably being eaten.
And that's it. We just cut back to New York. That's the end of the action in Louisiana. And we cut back, we see that Penny, not only is she being adopted, but she's returned the devil's eye to a museum, which has made her famous. I don't want to say the parents have only adopted her because she's famous and they want to get in the press. I am saying that, obviously, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, the film did establish that nobody wants her, so the only thing that's changed is now she's famous.
Do I want a sad 10-year-old girl, or do I want a sad 10-year-old girl with a priceless diamond?
I like to think the parents adopted her before she turned the diamond in.
Yeah. Oh, can we take her back? No.
We didn't realise she was going to turn it in.
We should have picked a more selfish orphan. Little Jim looks like he's got some edge to him.
And just to really hammer home my point, her final lines are fantastically delivered. I completely believe this little girl and the stories she's telling of the Rescue Aid Society who helped her, and she'll forever be grateful. And she says a quick hello to Bernard and Bianca, and it feels like a child saying these words for the first time, which is often what you don't get with child voice actors.
It's a really sweet moment, and again, I like that there's that acknowledgement, and we see the Rescue Aid Society meeting and watching it on TV, and it's not even pride that they've got the shout out. They're just happy they've done the right thing, which again, it's nice that we've kind of come full circle. And then the very end of the film is Bernard and Bianca getting called out to go and help another child in need. And we see them flying away on Orville's back once again. And that's how the film ends.
Overall...
Yep. Can't think of a better summary myself, Liam. Overall,
Overall, I think they were right to try and adapt this series. I think this could have gone on to be a flagship series in the Disney catalogue. Again, I think it was the first film outside of the package films with Saludos Amigos and the Three Caballeros to get a sequel, which is incredible. And not only that, I feel this film and this series could have gone on to have several sequels much earlier through the 80s, really.
I totally agree. As I said, I think the strength of this film is the characters, particularly Bernard and Bianca. Although I think Penny's a very good character, I think we get a nice round character arc with her. But yeah, I finished this film saying I'm happy to see more of their adventures. So I'm glad we do get the Rescuers Down Under, but that's not until 1991, of course. Before we move to our closing thoughts and make the decision as to whether or not this makes the list, Liam, is there anything else we need to talk about regarding the Rescuers?
We just need to have a conversation about how sexy Miss Bianca is.
I said in the Aristocats episode that Ava Gabor might, from my perspective, have the sexiest voice ever. So yeah, obviously it's Miss Bianca.
It's not only just the voices in this situation. I think there's something really sexy about the character model of this mouse. That's the sexiest mouse I've ever seen.
Do you think Don Bluth was like, oh, I see your Minnie Mouse, and I raise you a sexier mouse?
Who is simultaneously more like a mouse and yet sexier.
I've just finished putting the video together for our Aristocats podcast, and we've got to that point in Disney where I loathed going into Google Images under the film, and I know it's going to be the same with the Rescuers.
So before we can decide whether or not this makes the list, I just want to go back to the culture at Disney and the background of this film. As I mentioned, this was a project where they let a relatively young animator, Don Bluth, lead as one of the 4 directing animators. He wasn't the director of the film. I know I may have suggested that at times in the podcast. But if you watch it and you're familiar with Don Bluth films, you can see his fingerprints all over this. And there's no characters I could find that he is the character animator for, whereas the other 3 directing animators each had roles within the character animation. So it feels more like he took more of a producing and directing role in this film. And it's also important to note that this is the film that led to the creation of Don Bluth Studios, because in working on this project, he clashed with this culture of execs saying, keep things cheap, use the Xeroxing process, and instead he wanted to go back to the traditional animation of inking on top of sketches, and then that gets you your cells, and they wouldn't let him. And he felt that the art of animation was being lost at Disney in the name of chasing numbers and cutting costs, which is why during the production of their next film, The Fox and the Hound, they'd had enough, and Don Bluth, along with 9 other animators at Disney, left the company to found a new studio. And it's interesting seeing so much of what would become mainstays of Don Bluth films. Again, that weird grounded in bleakness, but with a fantastical twist.
And I think Disney as a company maybe had some regrets about that. In the 80s, we've got a very mixed bag of films that are tonally kind of all over the place, but I think Oliver and Company stands out as their concession to try and get back to this kind of film. It's also a film set in New York, and it's about criminal underclass manipulating people who don't really have anything, and it fails horribly as a film.
And I think it fails for the same reasons that this film struggles, which is they have to have those Disney elements in, and the high points and the fantastical points have to be so silly. And I think they never really understood what Don Bluth was trying to do and how to compete with that. And I think they should have just stuck to making Disney films, which is what they started doing again in the 90s. But to me, this film feels like a Don Bluth film that was restrained by Disney.
With that in mind, then, does it make the list?
This is definitely a flawed film, and the final product has problems that I find difficult to overlook. That said, it is a film I greatly admire. There is nothing else in the Disney catalogue quite like it. And as I say, those difficulties behind the scenes are what led to a completely different animation studio that forced Disney to up its game. And despite not growing up with this film, every time I watch it, I find myself enjoying it and just able to look over those problems. And I think I consider this a flawed masterpiece. So I want to put it on the list.
Even while we've been doing this podcast, I've been undecided on this film. On the one hand, it does have a lot of flaws. It's tonally all over the place, but at the same time, it genuinely has so much heart to it and gets such an emotive reaction from me. I honestly don't know which way to go on it. If we put The Rescuers on, but we didn't put Cinderella on, does that make us terrible people?
I will say the reason we didn't put Cinderella on is because everything Cinderella tries to do, Sleeping Beauty ended up doing better. I'll argue that no film in the catalogue tries to do and almost succeeds in doing what The Rescuers tries to do.
You know what, Liam? I think you've convinced me. I think I'm still a little unsure, so if we can put it in tiny mouse writing, I'm happy for it to go on the list.
I'm very happy to hear that. Again, this is a film I didn't grow up with. I only really discovered it in the last few years, and every time I watch it, I think I like it a little bit more. And with that, I'm happy to write in little tiny mouse writing, just underneath Robin Hood, The Rescuers.
Well, that was a hell of a journey. I feel we've travelled a long way in this podcast today.
I've got to admit, I was on the fence, so I'm glad to see it go on the list. But of course, these are our opinions. Have we been too quick to overlook the flaws in this, again, obviously quite flawed film? Or do you think it has earned its place on the list of Waly Gisnep's animated classics? Who do you think the sexiest character is? It's obviously Miss Bianca, but we're happy to hear you say that. But that is our discussion of The Rescuers. Ben, what are we going to be taking a look at next time?
Well, Liam, The Rescuers was indeed the first Disney film to get a proper sequel. But there's a character that's been pervading a lot of these Disney films that is going to be the main antagonist in the next film, because next time we're looking at racism and we're looking at The Fox and the Hound from 1981.
Well, that's certainly an interpretation of that film. I have to say, we finally hit it. This is the film I have watched the most in my entire life, and I'm very keen to rewatch it because I've not watched it in a very long time.
Well, this is going to be excellent because I have seen this film precisely once.
And so that's all from us. If you want to know what we think of The Fox and the Hound, remember to give it a watch and join us next time on Waly Gisnep's Animated Classics.